So welcome everybody. My name is Amir Zuccolo. I am the Social Enterprise Coordinator with the Community Sector Network, and we've been hosting a series of webinars about revenue diversification and social enterprise for the past year. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. So we are located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. They have occupied this land for over 12,000 years, and we honor the treaties of peace and friendship which recognized Mi'kmaq rights and established an ongoing relationship between nations. I'll also mention that we do have a revenue diversification incubator coming up. So if you're interested in that, you can email me, azuccolo@csnpei.com. And we also have a really exciting conference that's about revenue diversification, building capacity in the sector, equity, diversity, and inclusion coming up at the Delta on January 29th and 30th. So you can find more information about that on our website. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I will be giving you a brief overview of community bonds. And then I'm going to hand it over to Megan Stewart, who is the co-founder of the River Clyde Arts. And you probably are familiar with the pageant that they host every summer. And this year I had the opportunity to go for the first time. And it's a really beautiful community experience, hosted in a natural environment. So I think it was both unique from the perspective of being in nature and the community. So she's going to tell you more about the work that they've done towards getting a community bond underway. So can everyone see? No, this is not the one I want to share. Hold on a second. It is. Oh, interesting. Okay, you can see all my folders. Try that again. Huh, okay. Okay, is everybody able to see that sharing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So just click through these. So basically, community bond is part of what we call flexible debt. So your organization will have a capital continuum consisting of both low risk and high risk funds and equity. So at the low risk end, that's typical funding that we normally seek out for nonprofit organizations, government, foundation, private donors. And then moving along the spectrum to more riskier prospects, we can get into acquiring some traditional debt from our banks and credit unions. And then a little bit riskier still is looking at flexible debt, which is what we're going to be talking about today in terms of community loans, impact funds. And today we're going to be specifically focusing on community bonds. And at the very high risk end for an organization or a company, we'd be looking at equity through either getting investment through crowdfunding or venture capital. And then those players would have a stake in your organization. So that's not really as applicable to nonprofits since they're by definition cannot distribute profit share. So you can't really sell equity to the VC or crowdfunding. So this is a capital continuum that would be applicable to anybody, businesses and nonprofits, but our continuum ends at the flexible debt. So that flexible debt that we're looking at is part of what's called social finance. So social finance is finance that generates both financial and social, cultural, and environmental returns. So that's what we're interested from a nonprofit perspective in terms of revenue diversification and social enterprise is generating those financial returns so that we can continue to do the work that we're doing, but we also want to really tie in social, cultural, and environmental aspects to it. And those are the outcomes and outputs that you're looking for when you're doing your impact measurement evaluation. And within that social finance, community finance is a subset, and it refers to the tools and institutions and models that allow your community and local businesses and organizations to be aligned with those goals. And really the features of this is it's a locally controlled capital with a social impact focus, as has accessible financing and participation in terms of governance. So a community bond is a subset of that community finance tool. So what is a community bond? It is basically similar in many ways to a traditional bond. So they get issued as an interest-bearing loan from the investor, and then you can set different terms. So just the way if you would go into a bank, or I'm not sure if these are still available, but I remember my mom was always buying us Canada savings bonds. And then you could pick the term and it would come with a certain interest rate. And usually the longer the investment, the higher the interest rate. And then you can set the maturity dates and whether or not there be options to cash out early. And a community bond is very similar to that context, which has a set rate of return and a fixed term. So the model basically is that you would sell these bonds within the community. So a community member would purchase these bonds. You would use those bonds then to invest in a project, a building, a land acquisition, etc. And then upon maturity, the community bond investors would get paid out their bond plus the interest that they earned on that bond. And then they could choose to reinvest. If they were pleased with how the project went, pleased with their rate of return, they could then choose to reinvest in another bond that you ran to do another project. So it's this cyclical model involving the community from start to finish, including making that reinvestment really attractive. So what are the advantages to a community bond? Is that they're flexible. So your organization will set the terms. And so you have control over that in terms of the interest rate and the length of time for the bond. It's inclusive. So individuals can purchase community bonds. So a lot of investment at higher level into organizations requires a minimum investment that's not always achievable by sort of everyday people. It tends to be more high net worth individuals who are investing in the tens to hundreds of thousands. But you can set your community bond to make it inclusive by setting that term. As well, it's very engaging, so people feel that they're really participating in a really great project and funding it, and they have a purpose behind buying those bonds and giving the money to the organization to carry out the project. It can be very efficient because you can move faster than some of the more traditional donation campaigns. They've found that a lot of projects that run these, the bonds tend to be in demand. And of course, it's scalable. So you can sell, as you can set the terms, you can sell as many bonds as you need or like. And of course, with anything, there comes a series of risks. So one of those is a default risk. So that would be that if your project underperforms and you cannot pay back that bond and interest rate. And so there's different ways to mitigate all of these risk factors. So the way there would be to make sure that you have a good, solid business plan going in. You may have some assets or collateral to back up a repayment if the project falls through, and you've had a past experience with good financial stewardship. There's also a liquidity risk. So this is more coming from the investor's perspective, where once they've locked into this bond, they might not be able to sell it off early. So that would be set in the terms. And as well, because these are not traded like on a publicly traded stock exchange, the number of investors that they could sell this to, if they were permitted to sell before maturity, would be limited. So you just have to be really clear in your issuing of the bonds and doing some education with your investors to make sure that they understand the risks that they're assuming. And then that's part of the investor risk as well. So giving them a good solid education about the bond before entering into the agreement to reduce any risk there, as well as regular project updates so that they don't feel that they're in the dark in terms of how things are going. And then a resources risk. This happens because not only when you start doing a community bond raise and running a community bond, you've really started another project then. So you have your community bond raise and management, and then the project that you're doing, which is funded by the community bond. So you could get pretty strapped in your organization in terms of taking on all of this work. And so you just want to make sure that you have enough resources to manage both the bond and the project. So it's a really good idea here. I've highlighted Tapestry Community Capital in the last two slides. They're a really good resource and advisor on how to help you do this, which I believe is also the organization that Megan worked with to develop her feasibility study for the capital bond, or sorry, for the community bond. And before really getting into a community bond, you want to decide if it's really the right thing for your organization. So it's important to build out your capital continuum and see what your access to capital looks like. So of course, before we always consider our traditional funding streams, such as grants or grants from government or foundations, because those of course are non-repayable. So it's always good to access those first. We can look into traditional funding streams. And then if we move into this community bond, we want to make sure that the project has a robust and reliable revenue stream, supportive board of directors, good organizational capacity, the cash to cover the costs of creating the bond, because you'll need to involve lawyers and administrators, a good team to start the outreach, good networks to rely on, and a demonstrable track record of being able to manage projects successfully. So that helps you to manage all of these risks associated with the community bond. And so then this just outlines the team of people that you want to put behind the bond. So you have the leader who's going to be really selling the project, and then and liaising with the sales and marketing team, which are going to be holding pitch sessions. And then a bunch of folks behind the scene who are going to be dealing with the legal aspects, the structuring of the bond, creating the cash flow, and the analysis. And so obviously, just from these first set of slides, it does take a lot of work, but it's worth it. So don't be shy about the work, but just be sure that your enterprise is ready to take it on and have a clear understanding of what this investment can do for your organization. And it definitely is only suitable to a certain subset of nonprofits, but that's not really a size like large or small issue, or whether the idea is the best idea or the worst idea. It really depends on what your capacity is to run a community bond as well as run a project and effectively manage that bond and the investors. So that is a very, very broad overview without going into any of the details of a community bond. So I'll just thank you for your time there, and I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand it over to Megan, and she's going to share her experience of working with Tapestry Community Capital as the River Clyde Arts has conducted a feasibility study on looking at their community bond. So over to you, Megan. And I'm just going to turn off my audio and video, but I will be in the background.
Awesome. Great. So I think I'm sharing my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Send me a little thumbs up or say yes. Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Megan Stewart. I am the artistic director and co-founder of River Clyde Arts. And as Amir said, we have been we've been sort of learning about community bonds and whether this is a sort of financial instrument that could work for us. We worked with Tapestry Community Capital. And so, yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit today just kind of about our experience working with Tapestry this past spring. Then I'm going to share with you the community bond presentation that River Clyde Arts developed with Tapestry. And I'll answer some questions at the end of that presentation. And then I'll also kind of share some of our takeaways from our two public consultations that we did as part of that work with Tapestry to kind of just like gauge our community's interest in a bond project. So, River Clyde Arts has been working on a land acquisition project since early 2022. And so, on that journey, we've been learning a ton about social enterprise and then more recently about community bonds. So, a little bit of context in that on that land acquisition project, we've been trying to purchase property in New Glasgow, PEI, which is where we work, to be able to establish a permanent home for the organization, which would be a rural cultural hub where we can offer year-round programming. It would be a home for our current season of events, which includes the pageant, Sharing the Field, the River Clyde Solstice Walk. And we really see it as a place where islanders and visitors of all ages can visit and can come together to engage in shared creativity and community building and ecological stewardship. So we've been working with lots of different consultants and organizations on our social enterprise journey. And then this past spring, we started working with Tapestry. We participated in a 10-week community bond planning and feasibility project where we worked really closely with them in this kind of accelerated program to complete a financial analysis for a community bond raise to determine whether it's actually financially feasible for us to do this. We did research to identify some different target investor groups who we thought would be interested in participating in a community bond raise. We prepared a bunch of materials to promote our community bond consultations and the project itself, some of which you'll see today. And then, yeah, ultimately we delivered two public consultations to two different groups of potential investors to gauge their interest in a bond raise. We learned a lot through this process. And so I'm going to share this presentation with you. And then I'm also happy at the end to answer any questions about the process and about our experience of working with Tapestry. I will also reiterate that we have not yet launched a community bond raise, but based on our experience, we do think that this is a pretty viable mechanism to raise capital for a property acquisition, and we do expect that we'll eventually be able to launch one. The other thing that I'll say before I kind of get into the presentation is that when you are working on a project for several years, things change. And so we had been working really up until this spring towards purchasing a particular property in New Glasgow. We always knew that things might change with this property. And as it turned out, that property got taken off the market in the late spring of this year. And we've since had to broaden our search for a new property. So if you follow River Clyde Arts, you may have seen that in early November, we launched a very public search for a new home. And I will say that we've gathered some very compelling leads from that search. So we're feeling pretty hopeful. And then the thing I'll just say is that this presentation that you're about to see features our original target property. So kind of all the financial modeling and all of the concept drawings are based on that. And I'll just say that, you know, once we finalize our new target property, all of these components would be updated. So, yeah, so I'm just going to launch in here. So the other thing I'll just say to kind of do an additional land acknowledgement, you know, River Clyde Arts lives, works, and creates on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people in the district of Abegwit. We're very committed to respecting this land and the people who have inhabited it for thousands of years. We strive to learn their stories and their lessons and uphold them in our work. And the other thing I want to say in relation to that is that this presentation focuses on acquiring property. And we are in consultation with Indigenous partners and collaborators as part of our planning for this project. And we're really thinking about how we can integrate values of reconciliation and decolonization as we design and move forward with a land acquisition project for River Clyde Arts. So yeah, I've already introduced myself, and I won't really go into that, but that's a little bit of breakdown of who was in the room for our first bond presentation. And then just a little introduction to River Clyde Arts if you're not familiar with us. But we transform rural communities through collaborative outdoor art experiences. In this current time, marked by social division and environmental crisis, we really try to champion connection, creativity, and ecological stewardship. And we do that by inviting people across generations and cultures into a shared creative practice and community by offering a year-round season of theater and arts programming that includes the pageant, sharing the field, and the solstice walk. With imagination and play, we try to strengthen the ties between people and places, helping communities thrive. We began in 2015 with a singular project, the River Clyde Pageant. The pageant is a spectacular, community-engaged outdoor theater production that's performed on the fields and waterways of New Glasgow. The first edition of the pageant took place in the summer of 2016, and it has since become a beloved cultural event within the village and on PEI. And as the pageant has grown, so has our organization. So we began in 2016 just as an informal collective of myself, Care Wells, Emily Wells, and a small team of creative collaborators. And that's basically how we operated for the first 4 years of our existence. In 2020, we incorporated as a charitable nonprofit, and I was appointed artistic director and lead producer. And then in 2022, we hired our first additional staff member. To give you a bit of context of further context of how we've grown, our very first budget in 2016 was $25,000. And for the past 3 years, our annual operating budget has been over $500,000. And we have a year-round staff team that includes myself, 2 associate producers, and a communications coordinator. And so the River Clyde pageant remains at the heart of our season of activity, and it really continues to grow and evolve thanks to an ever-growing community of champions who are dedicated to co-creating the event with us, participating as performers, as workshop participants, as donors, sponsors, staff, and collaborators. The cast of the pageant each summer is about 95 people, ranging in age from 7 to 75. We engage a creative and production team of 30 people, and there's over 220 volunteers who support the delivery of the show. And then in 2020, in response to a growing chorus of voices in our community who are demanding more pageant programming, we started to expand our season. So we were able to rally more funding, and with that funding, we developed 2 new programs. We developed Sharing the Field, a celebration of the fall harvest, and the River Clyde Solstice Walk, which is coming up on December 21st this month. It'll be our 6th edition. Yeah, Sharing the Field just finished its 5th year. And yeah, here's some images from the Solstice Walk. Both of these events offer community workshops in arts, ecology, and culinary traditions. And they also both have a central festival day that features local performances and live music, and the opportunity to gather together around food. And these events have become a really important way for us to connect with new audiences and new artistic collaborators and really keep the pageant magic going from, the beginning of summer to the very end of December. And so then in early 2022, this opportunity presented itself to us. The 19-acre property in New Glasgow that hosted the pageant from 2016 to 2021 was put up for sale. And we launched a feasibility study to determine the financial, legal, and programmatic viability of a permanent home for River Clyde Arts. We completed a business plan, we did community consultations, and started working with fundraisers and consultants to lay the groundwork for a capital campaign. There was a lot of support for the idea from our larger community and from within the organization. A permanent home has the potential to solve persistent challenges that River Clyde Arts faces related to securing venues for programming and accommodations for artists. It also gives us room to develop more permanent infrastructure to support our work. It would also provide a space for us to further expand our activities, meeting the enormous desire from our community for more arts and ecological programming. And we see this every season because we always offer, this sort of slate of workshops, which fill up within minutes. So we cannot sort of meet the demand for programming. Our data also backs that up. So recent surveys indicate that 90% of patrons want to see more workshops from River Clyde Arts. They're willing to pay for those workshops at an average of $26 per session, or even as high as $100 per session. So a series of paid workshops would be one avenue that River Clyde Arts could use to generate revenue for the organization, which would provide the funding to support the free and by donation programming that we offer within our regular season of activities. And more broadly, we feel that this project meets an important need related to access and arts programming in rural PEI. So, arts activities and educational programs are often centered in urban locales, and on PEI, this is no different. We believe that islanders who live rurally deserve access to high quality arts programming that doesn't require them to drive 30 to 40 minutes into town to attend a workshop or event. So we've been working to address this for over a decade now, and a permanent space would enable us to better meet the demand on our programs from rural community members. We envision River Clyde Arts' permanent home as the place for world-class programming at the intersection of community, arts, and ecology. We see revenue generating potential through ecotourism activities such as kayak tours, cabins for short-term rentals, and artist residencies, and paid workshop series in drama, dance, music, design, culinary arts, and ecological education. The cultural hub will be a gathering place where all are welcome and where collaborative creativity connects us to the environment, to each other, and to our shared future. Once we acquire our target property, we're really planning sort of a phased development process where we would kind of over the course of time, build what we need to support kind of a first phase of work and then a sort of larger, more expanded phase. So these drawings that you see are based on the former property, but they depict sort of a 3-season cultural pavilion, which would be a space where we could have workshops or have performances in the event that there was weather that came up that would sort of cancel an ordinary outdoor performance. This also depicts an outdoor kitchen, which we imagine would be a space where participants and team members would be able to gather for shared meals as we are building our productions. This is a concept drawing for a cabin, which could be used for artist housing as well as for artist residencies in our kind of off season. And so I have this slide about like, why New Glasgow? Because lots of people have often been like, well, why not just move to some other community like in Three Rivers and, put the pageant there? Basically, we feel very, very connected to New Glasgow. It's been really, really important to our growth as an organization over the past decade. There's a really, really strong web of local businesses and community groups that offer so much to us already. and have enabled us to kind of grow so much in the past decade. Many of our most dedicated participants also kind of call this area home. Um, and so yeah, so the working with Tapestry has revealed that a community bond raise would be a viable financial tool to raise the capital that we need to make a purchase possible, and then to also potentially launch some initial renovations and infrastructure development. And I will get into the community bond specifics in more detail. So before I sort of get into the nitty gritty of financing and our specific sort of bond raise that we sort of broke down with our work with Tapestry, I just want to see if are there any questions about River Clyde Arts so far? If not, I will continue on and we'll have some more questions at the end. And you'll just have to speak up if you have questions because I can't see anybody. Okay, great. I'm going to keep on going. So the initial financial projections that we did showed that the project was going to cost about $2,085,000. We're imagining in this sort of new frame that the project is not going to cost that much, but it would probably very easily cost 1.5 million. And so in these projections that we did back in the spring, we sort of broke that number down into a capital campaign that had a target of 935,000, a community bond raise of 850,000, and then projected support from the provincial and federal government at 300,000, which is pretty modest, I would say. And then here we get into why invest. So our community who are part of River Clyde Arts have been very extraordinary kind of co-authors of the River Clyde Arts endeavor over the past decade. And with the property acquisition project, we really see that there's an opportunity to invite our community into a deeper relationship with the organization, to be co-investors in our future, and also co-investors in a shared community asset that supports long-term cultural infrastructure and PEI, supports public access to green space, and also strengthens our local economy. And, considering the ever evolving current global context, it's also a really great time to be offering opportunities for local investment into social enterprise projects. So if you're worried about investing your money into US-based companies or into companies that support militarization or fossil fuels or something else that doesn't align with your values, social finance is one avenue that really keeps your dollars invested in the local economy, supporting projects that are ethical and that have very positive and very visible social, cultural, and economic impacts. And so with our project, we sort of want to offer the community multiple ways to support. And so, you can invest your time and your skills into helping get this project off the ground. There's going to be a huge amount of skill sets that we need to make this kind of project happen. Ranging from, I don't know, accounting to construction to landscaping, as you can all imagine. The other way is that you can donate to our capital campaign, which would be a non-repayable financial contribution that offers tax receipt and recognition benefits. And then there's the community bond campaign, which invites supporters to purchase interest-earning bonds that then will be paid back at maturity according to a predetermined schedule. So time investments, fundraising committee, carpentry, pro bono legal work, that kind of thing. This is a bit of a breakdown of capital donations and sort of what kinds of benefits could emerge for different levels of donations. And then there's the community bond. And so as Amir talked about, The community bond is an interest-bearing loan that a nonprofit, charity, or cooperative can issue to support a project they are undertaking. Both individuals and organizations can purchase bonds and earn interest. And yeah, those investments then support getting those projects off the ground. So the money that is invested in bonds stays within the community. It enables the organization to access the capital that they need to finance a major project like a property purchase. Once that project is underway and is generating revenue for the organization, then that allows the organization the ability to repay their investors at the bond maturity date, or they can offer their investors the chance to reinvest during the bond renewal campaign. So this would be the second time around once the first bonds have come to maturity. Community bonds have been used very successfully by many types of organizations, typically in conjunction with other forms of financing like mortgages and lines of credit. And Tapestry have worked with organizations across the country to finance projects related to housing, green spaces, arts venues, green energy, and social programming. And in total, as of this spring, their campaigns have raised over $110 million from nearly 4,000 investors. And so as we worked with Tapestry in the spring, we went through this kind of extensive financial planning process to determine how we could use bonds and what kind of bonds we could offer. So this is our proposed bond series. It's still kind of in draft, but you get the idea. So there is Series A, which is the dragonfly. So we imagine that as a bond with a minimum investment of $1,000, which would have an interest rate of 2%. And the repayment terms is that it would be paid back at maturity within 5 years. The other thing I'll say too is that $1,000 is a minimum investment. So, if you wanted to invest $1,010, like that's fine. Then there's Series B, which is the minimum investment is $3,000. There's a 3% interest rate, and it's paid at maturity in 5 years' time. Series C is for a slightly larger investment of $10,000. The interest rate is a little bit higher at 4%. And this sort of repayment terms is that this bond generates compounding interest and it's paid back at maturity within 10 years. So compounding interest, everything is paid back in 10 years. Then with Series D, the minimum investment is $50,000, again, a 4% interest rate. This bond offers annual interest payments, and the term to maturity is 10 years. And then with any of these bonds, there is the option for the bondholder to donate the interest that they receive back to the organization, or they can take the entire investment and invest back once it reaches maturity. Yeah, and in terms of the sort of legal and financial setup, the thing that makes it really easy for organizations is that the Tapestry team kind of takes care of the kind of financial and administrative logistics in terms of the bond structure. So they provide all the infrastructure and the support through their investment portal. And interest payments are paid out to bondholders via direct deposit. Tapestry also takes care of the tax administrations. So they support bond issuers like River Clyde Arts in doing all of the preparing and filing and issuing of things like T5 statements, which are sent out annually to investors. So that's a bit of an overview of the project and the different pathways to support its creation. Again, we're still very much in this research phase. Really curious to hear people's thoughts about this. Yeah, and so now I'll sort of take a moment and see if anybody has any questions about either our work with Tapestry or about this presentation. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the public consultations that we did and what we heard from folks. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Hey, so before anyone has any questions, I just wanted to thank Megan for her time and for a really excellent presentation. I personally always love to hear about what's happening at River Clyde Arts because it seems to be growing and ever evolving. And I think it's really exciting that there's a nonprofit organization on PI who is sort of taking these next steps in terms of like really future thinking about how they're going to evolve and looking at these non-traditional funding sources and really embracing them and taking them to the next step. So I see that Michelle has her hand up. So go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering if you have any information about anyone or any organization that has done this in the past, and for what types of projects usually is this successful?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there have been quite a few organizations that have done this in the past. Nobody on PEI has done it nobody on PEI has done it through Tapestry, I would say. But I will say that there is a really interesting kind of history on PEI of community owned assets that sort of goes all the way back to like the Farmers Bank of Rustico. And you see that kind of thing in, farming and fishing communities where people come together to sort of purchase a shared asset. But some organizations that I'm familiar with that used community bonds successfully to raise capital for their projects. In Halifax, there is a sort of DIY anarchist art space called Radstorm. And they had the opportunity to buy their building in downtown Halifax for $500,000. And they launched a community bond campaign to do this. And they, I think, ran their bond campaign for about 9 months, and it was incredibly successful. So there was a ton of publicity generated just by the launch of their campaign, which then brought out a major donor who contributed like $200,000 to the project. They sold all of the bonds that they were looking to sell. And then I think they were able to buy their building this June. There's also an arts venue in Toronto called Hughes Room, which successfully did a bond raise, I think, to buy their building. There is a cooperative in Kensington Market in Toronto that have used community bonds to be able to gather revenue to buy and save buildings in that historic district. There's also, tons of examples of it in housing and green energy, that kind of thing. Any other questions? I'll take a moment to talk about our public consultations that we did. So we did two consultations this past spring. The first was an in-person consultation with about 10 people between the ages of 45 and 70. These people are current donors and River Clyde Arts supporters. They all fall sort of into a higher income bracket. And then we did a second consultation, which was virtual, which gathered about 15 people between the ages of 30 to 70, with the majority being between the age 30 to 45. Again, these are current River Clyde Arts supporters who, typically support as attendees, as social media followers, and some of them were donors. And these folks were sort of in lower to middle income brackets. It was really important that we could kind of speak to people kind of across different economic backgrounds, because we really wanted to see how this kind of project would land with them. And basically what we heard overall was there was a ton of positive response from both groups. There was also a ton of positive response that was generated just by people kind of hearing about the bond raise. And even if they couldn't make the consultations, they reached out to say, like, we're really excited by what you're doing. I'm definitely planning on buying a bond when you issue them. The older group was definitely interested in a combination of a charitable gift and also purchasing a bond. The younger group had a lot of interest in the bond as a super local and very ethical investment. And many of them saw it as kind of a stepping stone into charitable giving. So, it feels a bit safer to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to give this organization $1,000 of my money, which is a stretch for me, but I have this guarantee that I know I'm going to get it back in 5 years, and it will have earned 2% interest. We also talked in these consultations about the kind of tradition on PEI of community-owned assets, and how cool it is to kind of see that, taking new form with contemporary projects. And also with both groups, we noticed that the kind of community impact was the primary incentive for both of them in terms of being interested in a bond raise. It was way more the community impact over, the financial return. And then there was also discussion about how the bonds that we had designed do offer, I would say, pretty comparable or even better rates than traditional investments like GICs. There's a bit of conversation as well with both groups about whether a smaller bond offering that started at $500 might make it even more accessible to young people. So those were the kinds of things that came up. Yeah. Any other questions from folks?
There is a question in the chat from Jordan, so I'll just read it. It says, how would community bonds compare to the PEI CEDB program? CEDB falls more into equity tools, which has nonprofit complications, but was experimented with in the creative sector before. And then there's a news article link. I don't know, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think I am familiar with that. I think Red Island Cider used that or some variation of that to get their project off the ground. So I think there's similarities to that. It's definitely something that I researched on, along the way.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions for Megan, either in the chat or you can just put your hand up?
The other thing I'll say is that, like, if your organization is considering working with Tapestry and you want an introduction, you can actually let me know and I can connect you to them because there's benefits for us to kind of like introduce new people to the organization, especially if they are interested in doing their kind of planning and feasibility cohort. I'll say the sort of cohort program that we went through, it costs us $5,000 to do. I think they design it so that you do it over 10 to 12 weeks. We wanted to go faster, so we did it within, I think, 6 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks. But they do provide a lot of support for you. So you're kind of doing these weekly meetings with them. They are super organized. They have all these kind of like goalposts and milestones and loads of materials for organizations to kind of work from as they're assembling their own materials. So their own kind of presentation deck and info sheet and all of that kind of stuff. And they give you all of the tools also to do the kind of financial analysis as well.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, we can wrap it up there. And thanks again, Megan, for your time. It was very informative, I thought. And here's Benjamin.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to listen.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Sorry, there were actually two questions.
Oh, there were?
Jordan McDonald and Haley Hay both had their hands up.
Okay,
Haley
go
Haas,
ahead.
sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't see. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Sorry, I gave a clapping emoji. I did not have any questions.
Oh,
Okay, sorry. Jordan had, I thought Jordan
here.
had
I was good. Thanks.
Okay.
the green guy here.
No, he's not. It's a different Jordan. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Here.